At the so-called family reunion dinner, my mother, Margaret, locked her eyes on me, then turned to my father and said, "She was never our daughter, Thomas. She's been nothing but a liability that needed resolving." The wine in my glass had been tampered with, but they overlooked one critical fact. You can't simply erase a former CIA operative. They hadn't solved a problem. They'd awakened a war. I'm Claire Morgan, 31 years old, and for the first time in nearly 12 years, I was back in the place I once called home. My rental car whispered along the oak-lined streets of Barrington, California, a zip code drenched in old wealth and perfectly manicured deceit. I'd landed at Oakland International barely 90 minutes earlier, the California sunlight feeling strange and too warm against my skin. Here, multi-million-dollar estates hid like smug secrets behind towering wrought iron gates, guarded from the gaze of anyone deemed unworthy. The Morgan estate was the largest of them all, a cold, imposing shell of stone and glass that had once been my gilded cage. The chill of the marble foyer hit me before I even had time to take in the sight of Mrs. Dalton, the housekeeper who, as a child, was the only one who ever showed me an ounce of kindness. She used to sneak me miniature candy bars when no one was looking. Her gaze met mine, wide and anxious, her lips pressing together before she gave the smallest shake of her head and bowed. It was an unspoken warning. Before I could process it, my mother appeared, flawless in a cream-colored designer dress, her posture military perfect. The scent of her Creed perfume hit me like an invisible barrier. She placed her hands lightly on my shoulders, a gesture that only looked like an embrace to anyone watching. It was rehearsed, cold, and utterly hollow. "Claire," she greeted, her voice smooth as polished marble. Pulling back, her eyes swept over me like a scanner. "You've changed. There's something untamed about you." A pause. "Not like us." It wasn't a welcome, it was a verdict. Dinner was served at a massive mahogany table that gleamed beneath the unforgiving glow of a crystal chandelier. The meal itself was a performance of excess. Perfectly seared Wagyu beef, delicate asparagus tips, and a bottle of wine worth more than my first apartment's rent. My father, Thomas Morgan, head of Morgan Defense Systems, spoke at length about a newly secured multi-billion-dollar deal with the Pentagon. My older brother, Lucas, though not present, was celebrated for his latest success at a Silicon Valley tech company. His achievements drew pride. I was little more than an afterthought. "And what about you, Claire?" my father finally asked, not quite meeting my eyes. "Still doing your office work?" "It's rewarding," I answered, the lie bitter on my tongue. Margaret gave a low, patronizing laugh. "At least it keeps you busy." Then, to my father, "A quiet life for her is the best we could hope for, isn't it, dear?" "Stability is everything," my father said flatly. "You understand that, Claire?" Oh, I understood. I was the instability they intended to control. Margaret moved on to bragging about her latest charitable project, a foundation for displaced children. The irony was so staggering, I almost admired her for it. Then came the wine. She presented a bottle of 2016 Opus 1, a vintage with a price tag that could cover a family's groceries for weeks. She poured generously into my glass, the dark red liquid swirling like a threat dressed in elegance. "Drink, darling," she said with that impeccable, camera-ready smile. "To your return." My instincts, sharpened in the brutal training grounds of the farm, screamed. I took a small, deliberate sip, just enough to read the contents. The faint metallic note and slow, spreading heat in my throat were unmistakable. It was a precise, slow-acting toxin meant to mimic a natural heart failure. My pulse spiked. My gaze snapped to my mother, still smiling, her expression calm but eyes colder than ice. The room began to tilt. The chandelier's light shattered into 1,000 fractured shards. Their voices warped, muffled as if I were submerged underwater. But her words still cut clean through. "She was never our daughter, Thomas," she said without a hint of emotion. "She's a liability, a minor error in our legacy." Her voice was void of warmth, purely transactional. "It's time to remove her." My father said nothing. His silence was its own death sentence. They weren't just eliminating me. They were liquidating an asset. My body gave way, slumping forward and knocking over the wine glass. The crimson opus spilled across the pristine linen like a wound blooming. The last thing I saw was my mother's serene face as she slowly pulled on a pair of pristine white satin gloves. She was preparing to tidy up the mess being me. But as the blackness closed in, another voice cut through. The voice of my instructors, burned into me during those merciless days at Langley. Assess the threat. Secure the environment. Survive. Counterattack. They thought they'd finished me. They thought this was the end. They were wrong. The darkness dragged me into memories instead of oblivion, into a private gallery of scars, each one a relic of betrayal carefully catalogued and never forgotten. The first memory that rose to the surface took me back to when I was 13. It smelled of soldering flux and motor oil. I had just taken first place at the state science fair with my project, a fully functional robotic arm I had built from scratch. That machine had been my universe for months. I'd spent countless late nights in the garage, my fingers blistered from the soldering iron, clothes smudged with grease, my brain buzzing with obsession. That afternoon, I came home clutching the heavy gold-plated trophy, my heart racing with the kind of pure excitement I hadn't yet learned to hide. I found my mother in the sitting room arranging flowers. She glanced at the trophy, then at my oil-stained jeans, her perfectly painted lips tightening. "Claire," she said, disappointment dripping from every syllable. "A Morgan girl shouldn't waste her time with greasy machinery. You look unpresentable." That night there was a formal dinner at the country club, but it wasn't for me. It was to celebrate Lucas making the varsity tennis team. My trophy was quietly tucked away on a low shelf in my father's grand library, hidden behind a row of leather-bound encyclopedias. Within days, dust had claimed it, turning my triumph into a forgotten relic that didn't match the family image. That was the day I learned my victories were mine alone, to be carried in silence. The darkness shifted, pulling me into another scene. I was 14. The night smelled like rain and scorched rubber. Lucas, drunk and giddy behind the wheel of his brand-new Mercedes, had slammed into another car, leaving the other driver with a minor injury. I was in the passenger seat, the only witness. My father arrived before the police, his expression a mask of tightly controlled anger. He didn't check on the victim. Instead, he pulled me aside, his hand gripping my arm with bruising force. "You'll say you were driving," he ordered, his voice sharp and low. "You're underage. It'll be nothing but a slap on the wrist. Lucas's record stays clean. He can't have this on him." Something in me hardened. "No," I said, the words strange and powerful on my tongue. His eyes went cold, darker than I'd ever seen. "Your stubbornness will destroy this family." He wasn't talking about the accident. He was talking about me. That night, I stopped being their daughter and became their enemy. Then came the worst memory of all. I was 15. The moment that didn't just break the camel's back. It ground the pieces into dust. Lucas, desperate to pass his AP English class, stole an essay straight from my laptop and submitted it as his own. His teacher recognized my writing instantly. When confronted, Lucas didn't admit the truth. He claimed I'd hacked his email and turned it in myself out of jealousy. Margaret believed him without hesitation. She stormed into my room, her body shaking with a rage so raw it was almost unrecognizable. "You're a viper in this house," she spat. "You are sick with envy for your brother." Then she did something I will never forget. She pulled my birth certificate from my desk drawer, held it inches from my face, and tore it clean in half. The ripping sound was louder than her screaming. "I wish you had never been born," she shrieked, letting the pieces drift to the floor like brittle autumn leaves. My father stood in the doorway, silent, watching. When her fury burned out, he spoke just one sentence. "Go before you cause more damage." That was it. No chance to defend myself. No justice. I packed a single duffel bag, left the torn pieces of my identity scattered on the carpet, and walked out into the night. Halfway down the long driveway, a gentle, weathered hand caught my arm. Mrs. Dalton stood there under the porch light, tears streaming down her cheeks. She pressed a small roll of cash and a hastily wrapped sandwich into my palm. "Go, little one," she whispered, her voice thick. "Make a real life for yourself. This place doesn't deserve you." It was the only kindness I received that night, a fragile candle in a blizzard of betrayal. For years, That memory was the proof I held on to that I had once truly existed. A sudden, sharp gasp for air yanked me back into the present. The smell of damp earth and mildew filled my lungs. I wasn't in the dining room anymore. I was in the wine cellar. My training took over before my mind could even fully wake. Assess. Orient. Decide. Act. My body felt heavy, my thoughts sluggish, but I was intact. No obvious injuries. No weapons. No phone. They'd stripped me bare. They had carried me down here unconscious, planning what? A quiet vanishing? An unfortunate accident? They thought they'd left me to die. But then I saw it. On a dusty wooden crate beside me lay a single butterfly-shaped hair clip. My hair clip. They must have removed it while moving me. A detail. A mistake. A fatal one. They were sloppy. Overconfident. They thought they had eliminated a family nuisance, a troublesome daughter past her usefulness. But a sharp, icy clarity cut through the drug's haze. I looked around at the towering racks of priceless wine, silent sentinels in the dark. I thought of the girl who built the science fair project, the girl who refused to take the blame for a crime she didn't commit, the girl who left home with nothing but a duffel bag and a few crumpled bills. And I had to ask myself, did they truly believe I was still that 15-year-old kid? Had they forgotten the world they'd shoved me into? They hadn't just pushed me out, they'd thrown me to the wolves. And the wolves hadn't been kind. After leaving Barrington with the few hundred Mrs. Dalton had pressed into my hand, I escaped to the sprawling, nameless chaos of Los Angeles. Survival there was expensive, and the price wasn't paid in money alone. Those first weeks blurred together. Nights on park benches in MacArthur Park, nights in dingy motels that reeked of mildew and desperation. I came to know the deep, aching hollow of real hunger, something the catered meals girl I used to be had never felt. I worked anywhere that would take me. I scrubbed dishes in the stifling kitchen of a Mexican restaurant in Boyle Heights, my hands cracked and raw. I cleaned toilets at a film studio in Burbank, invisible to the glossy, beautiful people sweeping past me. It was there, kneeling on a bathroom floor with a sponge in my hand, that I glanced at a television in the lobby. And I saw her, Margaret Morgan, glowing in the soft light of a charity gala, speaking with perfect poise about compassion and social responsibility. The chirn across the bottom of the screen proudly declared her latest donation, $2.3 million. She was saving the world while her own daughter, just a few miles away, was debating if bread with green specks was still edible. That image, her saintly smile broadcast to strangers, was one of the sharpest humiliations of my life. They hadn't just cast me out. They'd erased me. That winter nearly finished me. One night, a storm swept through the city, dumping sheets of icy rain. I huddled under the shallow awning of a closed shop, soaked to the bone, shivering so hard my teeth hurt. Hunger gnawed at me. Exhaustion pressed down like a weight. For the first time, I thought about just stopping. That's when I saw him. A broad-shouldered man, weathered by time, with the straight-backed bearing of someone who'd once worn a uniform. He owned the small, battered boxing gym next door. He didn't ask questions. He didn't give pity. He just handed me an umbrella and a steaming styrofoam cup of soup from a nearby deli. "You look like a fighter," he rumbled. "You just haven't found your war yet." That simple act hit me like a jolt to the heart. He saw a fighter where I only saw a casualty. The next morning, I used my last $22 to buy a bus ticket and walked straight into a military recruitment office. If I couldn't have a family, I'd have a unit. If I couldn't have love, I'd have discipline. If the world was going to be a battlefield, I'd damn well be a soldier. The military gave me what I'd been starved of: structure, purpose, a way forward. My mind and my relentless drive to push my body caught attention. A few years later, I was standing at the gates of Camp Perry in Virginia. The farm, as its chosen few called it, the CIA's crucible for turning civilians into operatives. The farm stripped you bare. Your name, your history, your weaknesses, all gone. You learned to lie without blinking, endure interrogations meant to shatter you, and sharpen both your mind and body into weapons. It was hell. But for me, it was a strange kind of refuge. During brutal combat drills, my sparring partner's face became Lucas's. During psychological warfare exercises, I heard Margaret's voice instead of my instructor's, calling me a viper. My family had trained me long before Langley ever did. I graduated at the very top of my class. I could disappear into a crowd, read intent in the twitch of an eyebrow, survive with nothing but the clothes on my back in a hostile city. I became a ghost, an instrument of the United States government. But deep down, it wasn't about flag or country. It was about survival. Every skill I gained, every language I learned was another brick in the fortress I built around myself. They taught me to feel nothing when I needed to, the greatest gift and cruelest curse combined. And now, in the cold, damp wine cellar of the Morgan estate, I realized my true inheritance. It wasn't stocks or property or a name that opened doors. It was the scars, the grit, the ability to wield silence like a blade. My father had built an empire of steel and munitions. I had built myself from ash and betrayal. I looked at my hands, no longer soft, but hard and capable. I thought of his, signing defense contracts. I thought of hers, slipping into satin gloves. And I wondered which of us had the deadlier weapons. It was time to find out. Using the butterfly hair clip I'd found in the cellar, I worked the lock on a seldom-used service door and slipped into the cool pre-dawn silence of Barrington. 2 blocks away, I spotted a row of vehicles parked in the long-term lot of a private country club. Within minutes, one of them was mine. I headed south, each passing mile putting more distance between me and that fortress of stone and glass. In San Jose, I found a run-down roadside motel, peeling paint, buzzing neon, the kind of place where guests didn't make eye contact and paid in cash. Alone in the musty, dimly lit room, the adrenaline bled away, leaving behind a hollow ache that felt older than I was. There was only one person I could call. I walked to a gas station, bought a burner phone, and triggered an emergency contact protocol I had prayed I'd never need. Through a heavily encrypted channel, I sent a single coded word: compromised. The recipient was a man named Michael, codenamed Spectre. He'd been the senior case officer who recruited me, a ghost in the CIA whose career spanned from the Cold War to modern shadow wars. To the agency, he was a legend. To me, he was the only person who had ever looked past the surface and truly seen me. The burner vibrated exactly 9 minutes later. Morgan. Situation report. Michael's voice was calm, level, almost casual, as if I were calling to discuss the weather in Northern California. My own voice trembled at first, but I forced it into the clipped cadence of an operative in the field. Drugged. Detained. Attempted termination. Perpetrators are my biological family. There was no hesitation. No disbelief. Only a simple acknowledgement. Understood. Sanctuary protocol is live. Secure a location and stay put. I'll handle the back end. He paused, then added, softer but deliberate, "You are not alone." Those 4 words landed like a physical blow. In the 12 years since I'd walked down that driveway with a duffel bag, I had been entirely alone. Until now. My mind flooded with memories of him, not just teaching me how to plant a bug or slip handcuffs with a paperclip, but sitting with me after my first mission in Medellin when I came back shaken and raw. He hadn't told me to toughen up. He'd simply brewed a cup of Earl Grey, the way he remembered I liked it, and set it in front of me. The pain's part of the job, he'd said. How we carry it defines us. He'd show me how to turn that pain into armor instead of a cage. And in a profession where trust was currency, he trusted me without question. That trust was a weapon in its own right. An hour later, a secure text came through. Michael had built me a temporary identity, arranged clean funds, and sent a short list of trusted West Coast contacts. At the bottom was a line that made my pulse quicken. "This is your war, Morgan. But you will be armed." The first name on the list, Anita Sharma, a powerhouse attorney in San Francisco, known for shredding corporate giants. I dialed. Anita's office occupied the upper floors of a glass and steel tower in the financial district. Her panoramic view of the bay screamed influence. She was sharp-featured, impeccably dressed in a dark Tom Ford suit, and her gaze was the kind that took you apart piece by piece. I laid it all out, the drugging, the cellar, the escape. She didn't offer sympathy. She didn't need to. "They think you're dead," she said flatly when I finished. "That's our advantage." And we're not filing for emotional damages, that's weak. We're going after them for felony fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and intentional infliction of harm. We'll destroy their reputation and get the only thing they care about, their money. Her precision steadied me. This wasn't family drama anymore. This was an operation. Within 2 days, her team of relentless paralegals dug into the Morgan family's complex financial web and found the first crack. An older version of the family trust, one that listed me as a 1/3 beneficiary. Then they found the amendment. 6 months ago, my name had been erased. My entire share of the inheritance, enough to disappear and live quietly for decades, had been redirected to my brother, Lucas. The amendment to the Morgan Family Trust had been filed just 2 weeks before Morgan Defense announced a record-breaking $4.7 billion arms deal with a Middle Eastern regime infamous for its human rights abuses. Anita slid a single printed clause across her polished desk. I scanned the dense legal jargon. One provision demanded that the company's executive board maintain absolute and unquestionable stability, with no active or potential family disputes that might damage security or the public image. Her gaze locked on mine. They didn't just cut you out, Claire. They liquidated you. You were a risk factor. Eliminating you secured the deal. They sold you for a contract. The words hung between us, heavy as stone. I wasn't a daughter. I was a liability, deleted like a bad entry in a spreadsheet. While Anita went to war on the financial front, I attacked the forensic one. Michael's list led me to Rex Donovan, a grizzled ex-NTSB investigator turned private consultant. We met on a quiet wooded road near the site where my disappearance had been staged. My rental car had been found there, crumpled against a tree, the official story being that I'd panicked and fled after a minor accident. Rex walked the scene with a practiced eye, scanning like a man reading a language only he understood. Airbag deployed before impact, he muttered, pointing to data he'd pulled from the car's black box. Triggered remotely. Amateur work. He held up a vial of blood taken from the steering wheel. Not yours, he said flatly. DNA doesn't match. Belongs to some John Doe from a medical supply inventory. Probably stolen. Their arrogance was almost insulting. They thought a fake crash and a smear of someone else's blood could erase a CIA officer. They didn't know what they were up against. The final local clue came from a grainy security camera at a 24-hour convenience store about half a mile from the crash site. The timestamp was just 8 minutes after the 911 call. A hooded figure emerged from the tree line, scanning the lot before sprinting to a black SUV idling with its lights off. As the figure opened the door, the harsh fluorescent glare caught his face for one undeniable second. Lucas, the golden boy, the heir apparent, the one who'd been polishing his perfect public image while wiping my car clean and planting fake evidence in the dark. Somehow, the cowardice of it, the pathetic, clumsy execution, cut deeper than my mother's calculated cruelty. But the biggest blow hadn't landed yet. Back at the motel, I used my secure credentials and a satellite uplink to reach the CIA's internal servers. All I needed was my mission log from Buenos Aires, my airtight alibi. Access denied. File not found. Every report, every check-in, every timestamp from that week had been erased. My burner rang. Michael's voice was steady, but for the first time since I'd known him, I heard a trace of tension. Morgan, we've got a problem. A big one. That delete order didn't come from inside Langley. It was routed through a high-level server at Morgan Defense, using a classified backdoor almost no one even knows about. A cold knot formed in my stomach. Your father isn't just an arms dealer, Michael said, his tone dropping even lower. He's got reach, deep reach. This isn't just family business anymore. This is a matter of national security. A matter of national security. The words hit like a physical strike. My alibi being scrubbed wasn't just an inconvenience. It was an act of war. The CIA wasn't just my employer. It was my refuge. The only place where my skills meant something, where my past didn't define me. And they dragged their filthy corporate hands into it, turning my sanctuary into a shield for their crimes. The slow burn of my anger erupted into something far hotter, nuclear. They didn't just want me dead. They wanted me erased from the record entirely, as if the years I'd given to my country had never happened. I stumbled into the cramped motel bathroom and stared into the cracked mirror, but I didn't see my reflection. I saw my father's smug, power-bloated face, my mother's cold, immaculate smile, Lucas's empty, coward's eyes. They had taken everything: my family, my name, my past, and now my honor as an officer. The final tether snapped. Years of carefully built restraint shattered. This was no longer about survival. This was about retaliation. My fingers tightened on the porcelain sink until my knuckles turned white. A vow took shape in my mind, not spoken in words, but hammered in iron. It was born from betrayal so total it felt like molten metal in my veins. "You made me a weapon," I murmured to the reflection, my voice low and dangerous. "You taught me to stalk in the dark, to exploit weakness, to set traps, to wait for the perfect second to strike. You built this monster to serve you." I leaned in closer, locking eyes with this stranger in the mirror. And now the monster has come home. The burner phone was in my hand before I realized it. My pulse was steady. The rage had crystallized into something far sharper: purpose. I dialed Michael. He answered on the first ring. "Morgan." "Spectre, I need something," I said, my tone flat, stripped of emotion. A pause. I could hear him weighing the cost, the lines it would cross. "Go on." "I want the current identity and location of Mark Thorne, former lead auditor at Morgan Defense. Official story says he died in a car accident 5 years ago." I'm not buying it. It was a massive request, using agency-grade resources for personal retribution. In another life, I wouldn't have crossed that line. But they'd already dragged Langley into this. That made it my battlefield. Michael stayed silent a beat longer. "Then, I'll see what I can do. But be careful, Claire. You take this path, there's no coming back." "I know," I said. "I'm not coming back." While I waited for his reply, I made another move, one even riskier. Using a layered anonymizing protocol I'd perfected at the farm, I sent an untraceable text to the work phone of a woman named Chloe Mercer. She was a mid-level archivist at Morgan Defense. Years ago, her father, an engineer, had been discredited and pushed out after raising alarms about a missile guidance flaw. Weeks later, he was dead of a heart attack. My message was short: "They lied about your father's death. And they're lying about much more." It might have been reckless. But in an asymmetrical war, you don't win with brute force. You win by creating allies in unexpected places. She could ignore it. She could report me. Or she could be exactly the kind of spark I needed. If I was lucky, I'd just lit a fuse deep inside the Morgan Empire. Hours later, Michael's encrypted reply hit my burner. "Thorne alive. Alias in Bend, Oregon. Coordinates attached. Use extreme caution. Subject paranoid and armed." I didn't hesitate. That night, I drove the stolen car hard along the empty highways, north toward Oregon. Ben sat under the shadow of the Cascades, the perfect hole for a man who was supposed to be dead. The coordinates took me deep into the forest, to a cabin tucked among the trees. Smoke from the chimney curled into the cold air, a sign of life, and of someone who planned for trouble. I didn't go straight in. I spent hours watching from the cover of the woods, cataloging his movements. He was a creature of habit. And always armed, a small caliber pistol on his belt, even while splitting firewood. When the timing was right, I moved silently to his blind side. "Mark Thorne," I called evenly from the tree-line. "I'm not with Morgan Defense." He spun fast, the pistol up, and pointed at my chest before I could blink. His voice was hoarse from disuse. "Who are you?" I raised my hands slowly, palms empty. "Claire Morgan. I'm the daughter Richard Morgan tried to have killed last week." His eyes narrowed, suspicion warring with something else, the cautious spark of recognition. The barrel dipped an inch. "Inside," he said. The air inside the cabin was thick, coffee gone stale, wood smoke, and the heavier scent of years-old resentment. The walls were plastered with financial charts, yellowing newspaper clippings of Morgan Defense's successes, and scrawled notes in every open space. It wasn't a home. It was a war room. Mark told me his story. As lead auditor, he'd uncovered a multi-million-dollar slush fund, money used to bribe foreign officials and bury catastrophic weapons test failures. Before he could go public, they staged a car crash. They killed a drifter, planted my ID on the body, he said, voice trembling with the rage he'd been feeding for 5 years. They erased me. He'd been living here since, a ghost in self-imposed exile. Just like me. I can protect you, I told him steady. I can give you your life back. But I need your weapons. He stared for a long moment, searching for any trace of a lie. Finally, he moved to a heavy iron footlocker, unlocked it, and drew out a small digital audio recorder. I planted this in Richard's private conference room the day before I died, Mark said, his hand trembling slightly as he held out the recorder. Voice activated. It caught everything. He pressed play. The voice that filled the cabin was one I knew too well, smooth, elegant, and ice-cold. Margaret. The girl is the last loose end. Eliminate the liability. Everything will be buried. Then came Richard's voice, casually discussing with his attorneys how to quietly make Lucas's legal problems disappear, including a recent arrest in Costa Rica permanently. It was all there. The conspiracy. The motive. The complete absence of morality. The smoking gun. When I returned to my San Jose motel, another piece of the puzzle waited. An encrypted email from an unfamiliar address. I believe you. It was from Chloe Mercer. She wrote that her father had devoted his life to Morgan defense until he discovered a fatal flaw in a new missile guidance system. Instead of fixing it, they'd fired him, branded him a traitor, and months later he was dead from a heart attack. My mother always said it was a broken heart. Her message ended. I will help you. Tell me what you need. My gamble had worked. I sent her a secure reply with 2 requests from the Morgan Legal Archives, the sealed file on Lucas's arrest in Costa Rica, and the original unaltered family trust. An hour later, both were in my inbox. I had everything: the trust fraud, the staged accident, Lucas's criminal record, and an audio recording of my death sentence being ordered. My allies were ghosts my family had made. A vanished auditor, the daughter of a disgraced engineer, and me. Mark had been right. It was time for the ghosts to speak. The San Mateo Superior Court was a stage for power plays, and that day it was standing room only. The polished benches were full. Journalists packed the press gallery, smelling blood. Rival attorneys loitered in the back, hoping for a headline, and scattered among them were Barrington's high society, designer-clad vultures waiting to watch the Morgan family burn. I sat beside Anita, still and silent. Across the aisle, my family occupied the front row as if it were a royal box. Margaret, flawless in a winter-white Chanel suit, looked faintly irritated, as if enduring a tedious civic formality. Richard radiated the stiff, silent authority of a titan inconvenienced by a petty distraction. And Lucas was slouched in his chair, scrolling on his phone, the embodiment of bored entitlement. Their attorney, a sleek corporate shark named Arthur Delacroix, exuded smug certainty. Losing wasn't just improbable to him, it was unthinkable. When Anita rose to speak, Delacroix shot up immediately, cutting her off. Your Honor, he said with a contemptuous smirk, this is nothing more than a desperate shakedown by a bitter, unstable daughter trying to extort her loving family. There is no case here. Judge Marion Shaw, late 60s, sharp-eyed, no patience for theatrics, peered over her glasses at him. Mr. Delacroix, she said, her voice low but commanding. This is my courtroom. You'll speak when invited. Sit down and let Ms. Sharma proceed. Anita gave the faintest nod, then turned to the large presentation screen. Your Honor, she began evenly, the defense claims my client, Claire Morgan, was involved in a single-vehicle accident on the night of September 14th, after which she fled. However, she clicked the remote, and the screen filled with a heavily redacted CIA mission log. This partially declassified document proves that on that date, Officer Claire Morgan was conducting a classified national security operation in Buenos Aires. A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Right on cue, a side door opened and a stern man in a conservative suit entered. He identified himself as a representative from the CIA's Office of the Inspector General and formally authenticated the document. The shift in the room was immediate. Delacroix's confidence wavered. Richard's brow furrowed, his expression hardening. Margaret stayed stone-faced, but I caught her diamond-ringed hand tightening around the handle of her Hermes bag. Anita let the silence stretch before delivering the next strike. "And now, Your Honor," she said, her tone almost serene, "we'd like to play an audio recording for the court." Anita tapped a key on her laptop. The voice that spilled into the silent courtroom was elegant, cultured, and lethal. "Margaret's. Put the hair clip in the glove box. Personal touch. No blood, no trauma. It will look like a minor accident. We'll say the girl panicked and ran." A collective gasp swept the gallery. Pens scratched furiously in the press section. I looked at my mother. For the first time in my life, her perfect composure shattered. The mask cracked, revealing raw, unfiltered shock. Delacroix leapt to his feet, face flushed. "Objection, Your Honor. This is inadmissible, clearly obtained illegally." Judge Shaw's gavel cracked like a gunshot. "Overruled. As you know, Mr. Delacroix, this is a preliminary hearing, not a jury trial. The court will hear it. Sit down." He obeyed, seething. Anita waited for the quiet to settle, then delivered the next blow. "Your Honor, the prosecution calls its next witness, Mr. Mark Thorne." The name meant little to most in the room, but to Richard, it was a death knell. The heavy courtroom doors swung open. A man in a dated but pressed suit walked down the aisle, pale but steady. "Mark." The air changed instantly. Cameras clicked. Reporters erupted into whispered chaos. Richard shot to his feet, color draining from his face. "No," he breathed. "It can't be." Mark took the stand, was sworn in, and turned his gaze directly on Richard. "Hello, Richard," he said evenly. "It's been a while." That was the fracture point. The empire began to collapse. For the next hour, Mark laid out everything. The slush fund, the bribes, the covered-up weapons test failures. He named account numbers, dates, officials bribed. And then, without hesitation, he described how Richard Morgan personally ordered the staged car crash meant to kill him. Delacroix tried to object, to discredit, to stem the bleeding, but it was like pressing tissue paper against a dam. Judge Shaw's gavel kept order, but the room itself was on fire. When quiet finally fell, she fixed her eyes on my family, her tone glacial. "Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, this court finds sufficient cause to order an immediate criminal investigation into Richard Morgan, Margaret Morgan, and Lucas Morgan for felony fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder." Her gaze lingered on my mother's wrecked expression before the final gavel strike echoed, sealing the dynasty's death warrant. The fallout was instant and merciless. Morgan Defense's stock plummeted to nothing within hours. The Pentagon suspended every contract and launched its own investigation. The media branded it the defense industry's Enron. From my anonymous hotel room, I watched the empire that had been built on cruelty and deceit collapse on the evening news. I'd thought victory would feel like triumph. Instead, it was cold and hollow. 3 loose ends remained. The first was Lucas. I visited him in federal prison. The orange jumpsuit hung loosely on his diminished frame, the golden boy glow extinguished. He sat across from me behind thick plexiglass, picking up the phone. "Claire," he rasped. "I'm sorry." I studied him, not with hatred, but with a tired pity. "No, you're not," I said evenly. "You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught." The truth hung between us. "You never saw me as your sister. Just an obstacle for Dad to handle. Goodbye, Lucas." I hung up and walked away, leaving him to the 25 years he'd earned, and to the truth that he'd destroyed himself. The second was Richard. He'd had a mild stroke after the hearing and now lived in an oceanfront care facility, a king in exile. I found him in a wheelchair, staring at the horizon. He didn't look at me when I entered. On the table beside him, I set down his old brass Zippo lighter, worn smooth from decades of use. "You had a choice," I said quietly. "You could have been a father. You chose to be a CEO." I waited for a response I knew wouldn't come. I hope it was worth it. He stayed fixed on the horizon, saying nothing. His silence wasn't the shield it had once been. It was the hollow stillness of a man utterly defeated. I left without another word, closing that chapter for good. The last confrontation was the hardest. Margaret was under house arrest in the Barrington estate, now an echoing mausoleum stripped of its grandeur, filled only with her failures. When she saw me, her eyes, once cold and controlled, burned with a frantic, cornered fury. "You," she hissed, her voice jagged. "You've ruined everything. You were always a curse on this family." I looked at her, standing amid the ruins she'd made, and felt nothing but a distant, surgical detachment. "No, Mrs. Morgan," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "I'm not the curse. I'm the consequence. The consequence of your choices." I held her wild gaze. "You taught me only the strong survive. You taught me sentiment is weakness, and that winning is all that matters." I gave her a small, cold smile. "I learned a lesson well. Thank you for the education." I turned and walked out. Her screams followed me down the hall, breaking apart into something small and pitiful before fading to nothing. That night, I stood on the balcony of my hotel, watching San Francisco glitter under the dark sky. The war was over. I had justice. I'd destroyed the people who tried to destroy me. And yet, in the quiet, one question lingered. Who was I now? I was no longer a Morgan. No longer an active officer living in the shadows. For the first time in my adult life, I was free, and that freedom was both exhilarating and terrifying. 2 weeks later, I submitted my resignation to the CIA. Michael handled it quietly, ensuring my exit was clean and final. In our last meeting, a bittersweet farewell in a quiet Virginia diner, he slid an envelope across the table. Inside, a new passport, a new name, a clean slate. "You've served this country with honor, Morgan," he said gently. "Now it's time to serve yourself." I thanked him, my mentor, my chosen family, the only father figure I'd ever truly had. Driving away from Langley felt like shedding an old skin. The weight of being Claire Morgan, CIA officer, and unwanted daughter finally lifted. I wasn't a spy anymore. I wasn't a victim. I was just a woman looking for a place to belong. I found it in the most unexpected place, a small weathered cabin on the edge of a frozen lake in Maine. The winters here were long and merciless, but the silence was pure and healing. The question I'd asked myself in San Francisco, how to live, started to find its answers. I spent my days relearning how to be a person instead of a weapon. I read books not for intelligence reports, but for the beauty of the words. Emerson's reflections on nature and self-reliance spoke to me in ways I hadn't expected. I started a small indoor garden, savoring the grounding act of working the soil. One afternoon, I drove to a local shelter and came home with a big, clumsy golden retriever with mournful eyes. I named him Dalton, a quiet tribute to the only person in that house who had shown me pure kindness. Months later, a small package arrived from Michael. Inside was my father's old brass Zippo lighter. Tucked beside it, a note in his careful handwriting. "Your legacy isn't what they left you. It's what you survived." I turned the lighter over in my palm, feeling the ghost of another life in its weight. For a moment, I almost flicked it open. Instead, I placed it inside a wooden box on the highest shelf of the closet. The past was part of my story, but it would never dictate my future. Healing, I learned, isn't linear. Some nights I still woke gasping, adrenaline flooding my veins. Some days the quiet felt less like peace and more like loneliness. But I kept returning to something Viktor Frankl once wrote: when we are no longer able to change a situation, we are challenged to change ourselves. I couldn't change the betrayals, the cruelty, the years spent feeling small. But I could change how they lived in me. I learned to breathe through the panic, to sit with the emptiness until it passed, and to forgive, not them, because what they did was beyond forgiveness, but myself for carrying their sins for so long. This morning, I sat by the window with a steaming mug of tea, watching the sunrise spill pink and gold across the frozen lake. Dalton curled at my feet, breathing slow and steady. For the first time in longer than I could remember, I felt complete peace. They had tried to erase my name, but I had found myself. They had tried to bury me, but they never knew. I was a seed, and here, in the quiet heart of a Maine winter, I was finally beginning to bloom. My story has found its peace. And if you're hearing this and your story is still unfolding, if you felt the sting of being undervalued or the weight of being unseen, know this: you are not alone. And your worth is never determined by those too blind to see it.